Hello, my friends. Before we start this terrifying story, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. A 7-day Caribbean cruise on the Silver Horizon, a gleaming modern ship with everything a traveler could want. Pools, fine dining, live shows, and miles of sunlit deck. I had my own balcony cabin on the 11th deck, the perfect vantage point to watch the endless ocean stretch to the horizon. I was alone on this trip, craving solitude, but I never imagined solitude could become a nightmare. The first 2 days were blissful. I spent my mornings reading by the pool, afternoons exploring the ship's shops and lounges, and evenings in the dining room, surrounded by strangers who laughed and toasted to their vacations. Everything felt normal, perfect. But on the third night, I noticed something strange. I'd been sitting on my balcony, watching the stars, when I saw someone, or something, moving in the water below. At first, I thought it was a reflection or a wave, but then I saw it again. A dark figure, human-shaped, gliding beneath the surface. I blinked. It was gone. I told myself I was imagining things, a trick of the moonlight or fatigue. The fourth night, the first real terror began. I was awoken around 2:30 a.m. by a faint knocking. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My cabin door rattled as if someone or something was outside. I told myself it was the ship settling, but then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to my door. I reached for the cabin phone to call the front desk. Dead. Not even a dial tone. My phone? No signal. Panic began to creep in. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. The footsteps paused, then moved away. I waited for what felt like hours before I dared move. I spent the 5th day in a daze, avoiding the hallways, sticking to the crowded decks. But at dinner, I noticed passengers behaving oddly. Some sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Others moved in subtle jerky motions like marionettes on invisible strings. Their eyes were hollow, or perhaps they were just empty. The thought unnerved me so much I barely touched my food. By the 5th night, things escalated. I woke again to knocking, softer this time, but accompanied by whispers, soft, high-pitched, almost melodic, repeating my name. I forced myself to leave the cabin, walking cautiously into the hall. The lights flickered, casting long shadows. Doors appeared where they shouldn't, leading to corridors I had never seen. I walked down one, drawn toward a dim glow at the end. There, a figure stood. A crew member, I thought, but their movements were wrong. Jerky, unnatural. Their face was pale, almost waxen, and their mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. When they moved toward me, I turned and ran. The stairwells were no longer safe. I discovered that the ship's layout was changing, corridors twisting impossibly, staircases descending deeper than they should, doors opening into rooms filled with water. Some rooms had faces beneath the surface, pressing upward with mouths opening and closing silently. I screamed, banging on the doors, but they were unyielding. By the 6th night, I realized I could not stay in my cabin. I stayed on the upper decks, hoping the open air would keep me safe, but the ship itself seemed alive. The wind carried whispers, the waves reflected faces that weren't mine, and shadows moved across the deck as though they were searching. I spotted one of the strange figures from the hallways standing at the railing, watching me. The figure's head tilted unnaturally as if listening. I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. I tried the lifeboats, hoping to escape. I untied one, pushed it into the water, and began to paddle frantically. Behind me, the ship loomed impossibly large, its decks twisting in ways no architectural plan could justify. Figures appeared along the rails, passengers, crew, faces I recognized but that shouldn't have been there, all staring at me, mouths opening in silent screams. The water churned, and shapes swirled beneath the surface, reaching for me, whispering my name. I don't know how long I paddled, hours, maybe more. When the sun rose, I found myself on a small, deserted island. Rescue came eventually, but there was no record of the Silver Horizon, no missing passengers, nothing. Authorities dismissed my story as a hallucination, stress-induced paranoia, or sleepwalking. I wanted to believe them, but I know what I experienced was real. Months later, I still have nightmares. At night, I hear faint knocks on my apartment door or footsteps on the floor above. Shadows move in the corners of my vision, disappearing when I look directly at them. I see shapes in the water whenever I take a shower or glance at the ocean in photos. The ship is out there somewhere, waiting. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that one day it will come for me again. I tell people it was a dream, a strange, terrifying dream. But I know the truth. Cruise ships like the Silver Horizon are not just vessels, they are hunting grounds. And the moment you step aboard, the moment you let the waves carry you away from the safety of land, you are no longer a guest. You are prey. No one believes me. No one ever will. But I know. And that knowledge haunts me every waking hour. The ocean is vast, infinite, and full of secrets. Some of them, I've learned, are better left undiscovered. The last memory I have from the ship is of a corridor that should not exist. Walls slick with water, faces beneath the surface reaching upward, all whispering my name. I ran, I paddled, I escaped, but the whispers followed me to land, to every moment of my life since. Sometimes, when the wind carries the smell of salt and engine oil, I swear I hear the ship calling, beckoning me back. And I know that if I ever close my eyes too long, if I ever forget, it will find me. I will never take another cruise. Not ever. But I know deep down that it doesn't matter. The Silver Horizon is still out there, somewhere, slicing through the darkness, waiting for the next person foolish enough to think they are safe. And one day, it will come back for me. I had always considered myself lucky, not just in life, but in travel. I'd taken dozens of trips over the years, from backpacking in Europe to luxury resorts in the Caribbean. So when I booked the 7-day cruise aboard the Ocean Empress, I thought it would be nothing but relaxation, endless sun, sparkling water, and the illusion of leaving the world behind. I could not have been more wrong. The first day was bliss. The ship was colossal, polished and gleaming under the Florida sun. I had a balcony cabin on the 12th deck, giving me the perfect view of the endless horizon. I spent hours simply leaning over the railing, feeling the spray of seawater on my face, thinking how wonderful life could be. The other passengers seemed cheerful, the staff courteous, and the atmosphere was festive. Nothing seemed out of place. It started subtly. On the second night, after returning to my cabin from the main dining hall, I noticed the balcony door slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it before dinner. I brushed it off as the ship's air conditioning or the wind, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Later, as I drifted to sleep, I heard faint tapping. Not from outside, but inside the walls of my cabin. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was the ship settling and eventually fell into an uneasy sleep. The third night, the disturbances intensified. I was awakened by the smell of smoke, thick, acrid, and unmistakable. I rushed to the hallway to find passengers standing outside their cabins, murmuring nervously, faces pale and frozen in confusion. When I tried to speak to one of them, their lips didn't move. They simply stared, eyes blank. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. The intercom system crackled and a calm, cheerful voice announced that everything was normal, that the ship was operating safely. But I knew it wasn't. By the fourth night, I was terrified. Around 2 a.m., I woke to footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the corridor outside my cabin. I pressed myself against the wall, watching. The hallway was empty, silent, yet the footsteps continued, echoing down corridors that should have been dead quiet. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. The cabin phone didn't work either. I stepped onto the balcony to clear my head. The ocean was black, calm, deceptively peaceful. But as I peered over the railing, I noticed a faint outline of a figure moving beneath the water. A person? No, it seemed wrong. Too large, elongated, distorted. It sank out of sight before I could get a clear look. My rational mind tried to dismiss it as a trick of the shadows, the moonlight on the waves, anything to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The fifth night was worse. I woke to the sound of soft whispering, voices calling my name, coming from every direction at once. It wasn't just my cabin, it echoed through the ship. I hurried to the hallway, and the temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the air. Shadows moved along the walls in ways that were impossible. I ran toward the stairwell, desperate to find someone, anyone, but the doors I usually used were gone. In their place were steel panels, cold and unyielding. As I turned a corner, I came face to face with a group of passengers I recognized from dinner the night before. Their faces were pale, almost gray, their eyes empty and hollow. They didn't speak, but I could feel them staring into me, penetrating me. One stepped forward slowly, arms outstretched, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. When it opened its mouth, the sound that came out wasn't a voice. It was a guttural, wet rasping, a sound no human should be capable of making. I bolted, running blindly through the corridors. The layout of the ship seemed to have changed. Hallways twisted in ways that should have been impossible. Doors led to stairwells that descended into darkness, and the air became thick and heavy. I stumbled into the service corridors I had seen only briefly before, but they were flooded. Black water lapped at my ankles, then knees, carrying with it faces. Hundreds of faces beneath the surface, mouths moving silently, eyes glowing faintly. I screamed and pulled myself out, gagging, trying to escape. By the sixth night, the terror was relentless. I tried staying on the upper decks, hoping to avoid the impossible corridors and the twisted figures. But the ship itself seemed alive, rearranging itself. I could no longer trust stairwells or elevators. One moment I would be on the 10th deck, the next I found myself descending into an enormous industrial-like space I had never seen. Dark, wet, smelling of rust and something worse. In the center, a massive pool of water reflected faintly dim lights. I saw movement beneath it, shadows swimming, faces peeking through. The water surged, rising higher, as if the ship was swallowing itself. I ran along the perimeter, trying to find a ladder or an exit. That's when I saw him. A man standing at the edge of the water. Tall, thin, soaked to the bone, his face pale and stretched unnaturally, eyes black, devoid of any emotion. He raised a hand, and the shadows in the water rose with him, swirling, reaching. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. "It's your turn," he whispered, voice echoing through the chamber. I ran. Every corridor was now flooded, walls stretching impossibly, doors opening into rooms filled with more water. Faces, passengers, crew, even strangers I didn't recognize, emerged from the depths, mouths moving in silent screams. Some reached toward me, others simply watched, their eyes glowing faintly red. I couldn't stop. My lungs burned, my heart pounded, adrenaline fueling my flight. I eventually stumbled onto a deck I didn't know existed, high above the water. The night was calm, the ocean dark, but I could feel the presence of the ship itself, watching, alive, rearranging, hunting. I descended the railing to a lifeboat, my hands raw from the metal edges. I untied it and let it drop into the water, paddling with every ounce of strength I had. Behind me, the Ocean Empress loomed like a monstrous silhouette, decks stretching impossibly high, lights flickering in patterns that defied logic. Figures appeared on the railings, passengers, staff, faces pale, hollow-eyed, grinning impossibly wide. The water churned with black shapes as the ship moved silently, faster than any vessel should be able to. Whispers filled my head, hundreds of voices speaking at once, calling my name, coaxing me back. I paddled until my arms were raw, until my muscles burned and my body trembled with exhaustion. The ship did not pursue me beyond a certain distance. Somehow, I made it to a small, deserted island the next morning. Rescue eventually came, but no one believed me. No cruise line had records of the Ocean Empress, no passengers were reported missing, and the Coast Guard dismissed my story as a hallucination. But I know what I experienced was real. I can't forget the faces in the water, the way the ship itself seemed alive, the whispering voices, the man with the pale, stretched face. Now, months later, I still see it. In my dreams, I hear the water lapping against impossible corridors, the whispers calling my name. Sometimes I wake in a cold sweat, hearing faint footsteps outside my apartment, a tapping on the walls, a shadow moving just beyond my vision. I know the Ocean Empress is still out there, somewhere in the Atlantic, waiting for the next person who thinks a luxury cruise is just a vacation. And I know deep down, it is waiting for me too. I had never been a superstitious person, never given much thought to warnings, omens, or stories of things going wrong at sea. I like to think of myself as practical, rational, someone who believed in facts rather than fables. That all changed on the 7th night of the cruise I thought would be my dream vacation. The Mariner's Promise had set sail from Miami, a shining fortress of luxury with polished brass railings, sparkling decks, and the smell of ocean and salt in the air. I had booked a cabin on the 10th deck, just enough above the water to feel close to the waves without worrying about seasickness. For the first few days, everything was perfect. The sun, the cocktails, the endless buffet lines, they were all part of the allure. But I started noticing little things that didn't make sense, small things. It started with the elevators, nothing major, just subtle. On the second night, I had been returning to my cabin after a late dinner when the elevator stopped at my floor. The doors opened, and I stepped out into a hallway that looked almost normal. But the carpet was wet. Not damp, not a spill, but soaked, as if the hall had been washed in seawater. And then I noticed it. The door numbers didn't match the deck I was on. My cabin was 1007. The numbers I saw were 1307, 1407. Impossible for this floor. I hesitated, then shook my head and walked back into the elevator. When it reopened on my floor, everything was normal again. I told myself it was my imagination. By the 4th night, I was beginning to feel uneasy. I woke up around 3 a.m., heart racing. My cabin door handle rattled softly. I told myself it was just the ship settling. But the knocking continued, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I lay frozen, listening. And then I heard breathing. Soft, shallow, coming from the corridor outside my door. I grabbed my phone to call the front desk. No signal. I picked up the cabin phone. Dead. Just static. I slowly opened the door. The hallway stretched into darkness, illuminated only by emergency lights that flickered weakly. I stepped out. The sound of someone, or something, following me echoed behind me. But whenever I turned, no one was there. I spent the next day trying to convince myself it was nerves, exhaustion, maybe even a trick of the waves rocking the ship. I joined the morning yoga session on the deck, ate lunch in the buffet, even tried to chat with other passengers. Everyone seemed normal. But then I started noticing them, the people who weren't. At dinner, some passengers would sit staring straight ahead, not moving, not eating, almost blending into the shadows. And their eyes, blank, vacant, like they were waiting for something I couldn't see. The 5th night was the first real encounter. I woke to the sound of a child laughing, soft, high-pitched, almost melodic, coming from the hallway. But I knew there were no children on this cruise. It was adults only. I stepped into the corridor. The laughter stopped instantly. A figure stood at the end of the hall, a small boy, soaked, clothes clinging to his skin, pale as death, hair plastered to his face. He looked at me and smiled, slowly, unnaturally wide. Then he vanished, not into the shadows, not behind a door, just vanished. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every creak of the ship, every gust of wind against the hull made me jump. The next morning, I approached a staff member, tried to ask about the boy. "There are no children on this cruise," she said, eyes wide, voice tight. "Maybe you dreamt it?" But there was something in her tone, something almost fearful. The sixth night, it escalated. I was in my cabin when the lights went out. Complete darkness. Only the faint glow of the emergency lights lit the balcony door. I heard movement, soft, dragging footsteps circling my cabin, then scratching like nails on metal. The sound came from inside the walls. I pressed myself against the door, trying not to breathe, and then I heard it clearly. My name. Whispered, coaxing, urgent. "Come!" I couldn't take it. I ran out onto the balcony. The ocean stretched black and endless beneath me. The ship was still, silent, almost too quiet. And then I saw them. Faces, hundreds of them emerging from the water, pale gray, eyes empty but locked onto me, mouths opening and closing as if screaming, but no sound. Some floated, some climbed the rails, and then all at once, they were gone. The water returned to normal, calm and blue under the moonlight, as if nothing had happened. By the seventh night, the terror had reached its peak. I stayed on the upper deck, afraid to return to my cabin. The ship itself seemed to shift around me. Decks stretched further than they should, doors opened to rooms that didn't exist, staircases twisted impossibly. And then I saw him, a man standing at the railing, watching me. Tall, thin, his suit soaked, hair plastered to his head, eyes glowing faintly red. When he raised a hand, I froze. A low, resonant whisper filled the air. "It's your turn." Panic consumed me. I ran, diving down stairwells into corridors that weren't on any map. I passed rooms filled with water, the reflections showing faces of passengers who had vanished, their mouths moving in silent screams. I couldn't find the elevators. They had disappeared. I ran blindly until I stumbled into a massive lounge, the grand windows reflecting the night sky. There, I saw the entire passenger list, the faces of everyone on board, frozen, staring at me, veins dark, skin pallid, mouths opening impossibly wide. They weren't alive. They were waiting. I backed away, and the man appeared beside me. "The ship chooses," he said, voice hollow, echoing, "and it has chosen you." He vanished, and suddenly I was submerged. Cold water engulfed me, dark and thick. Faces surrounded me, pulling, whispering, screaming. I thrashed, clawed, trying to reach the surface, but the water was endless, bottomless. I woke the next morning on a lifeboat drifting toward a small, deserted island. The ship was gone, the sea calm, as if nothing had happened. Rescue came eventually, but no one believed me. They said no cruise ship matching that name had sailed in the area. No passengers were missing, nothing. But I know what I saw, and I know the ship is out there, still, waiting. I can't escape the nightmares. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, see the faces in the water, feel the cold drag of the ship beneath me. I thought I was safe on land, but I've learned there's no escape. The mariner's promise is still out there, slicing through black waters, hunting. And one day it will come back for me. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months. A week on the Atlantic, cruising from Miami to the Bahamas, complete with all the glittering amenities of a luxury liner. I'd convinced myself that after a year of endless work and exhaustion, this was exactly what I needed. Sun, cocktails, endless ocean. The ship, the Celestial Queen, was beautiful. Towering decks gleamed in the sunset, and the hull cut through the water with a smooth grace. Boarding was seamless. The staff were efficient, polite, and seemingly cheerful in that unnervingly perfect way cruise crews can be. I had a cabin on the 12th deck with a balcony overlooking the ocean. From there, the world looked impossibly calm, serene. the very definition of escape. The first 2 nights passed without incident. I wandered the decks, joined the buffet dinners, watched passengers dance under neon lights in the ship's atrium. But on the 3rd night, I noticed something odd. I was leaning over my balcony railing, looking at the wake of the ship cutting through the black water, when I saw a shape in the ocean. Something enormous, dark, moving just beneath the surface. I blinked. It was gone. I shrugged it off. Perhaps a large wave, a shadow, nothing more. By the 4th night, the first truly strange events began. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of whispers, barely audible, almost like the ocean itself was speaking, but urgent, panicked. I looked around my cabin. The balcony door was open. I hadn't left it open when I fell asleep. I stepped onto the deck. The night air was heavy, humid, salty. Nothing but water stretching into the darkness. And yet I could hear the whispers again, this time closer, like they were coming from the hull of the ship itself. I leaned over to look. The water was black and calm. For a moment, I thought I saw a face, a human face, pressing up from the depths, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming silently. I stumbled back, heart racing, telling myself it was a trick of the light, or my imagination running wild. The 5th night was worse. I was awakened by banging, but not the kind of banging that comes from waves or the engine. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like someone, or something, was trying to break in. I froze, staring at the cabin door. Tap, tap, tap. The ship's hallways were supposed to be quiet at this hour, and yet I could hear footsteps moving outside, slow, deliberate, pausing at each cabin door as if choosing. I wanted to call the front desk, but my phone, my cabin phone, everything was dead. No signal, just silence except for the footsteps. I dressed and cautiously opened my door. The corridor was empty, but the lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. I walked toward the stairwell, intending to find someone, anyone, but every door I passed was locked. Then I saw them, passengers from dinner, walking in single file down the hall, silent, staring straight ahead. Their faces were pale, almost waxen, eyes dull, expressionless. I tried to speak to one, and its head snapped toward me with unnatural speed, mouth opening impossibly wide, teeth too long, stretching beyond what any human jaw could contain. I ran. The ship's corridors twisted in impossible ways, stairs leading to decks that shouldn't exist, doors opening to maintenance rooms I was certain were locked. Everywhere I looked, shadows moved, figures that weren't quite human, reaching for me with elongated limbs. I ducked into a storage closet, locking the door behind me. My chest heaved, sweat mixing with the damp air. I heard it then, the whispers again, but closer, inside the closet now. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said. It was soft, female, but there was something wrong with it, like the sound had been slowed, warped. "It's not safe." Hours, maybe minutes passed. I don't know. When I finally dared to open the door, the hallway was empty again. I tried to rationalize everything: stress, exhaustion, the eeriness of being on a ship at night. I told myself it was a nightmare. But then came the 6th night. I woke to the sound of someone crying, soft, muffled, desperate. I followed it to the atrium, where the ship's grand chandelier should have been sparkling above the polished floors. Instead, the lights flickered weakly. And there, in the center of the atrium, were dozens of passengers, all standing in tight circles. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths moving silently as if chanting something I couldn't hear. I recognized a few faces, people I had spoken to at dinner. Their skin was unnaturally pale, the veins around their eyes dark, almost black. When they saw me, the chanting stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then all of them turned in unison, slowly, deliberately, staring at me with eyes that seemed to pierce through me. I ran again, this time toward the lower decks. The stairwells I had used before now twisted impossibly, descending into darkness I had no memory of from the day before. I passed doors that opened onto rooms filled with water, black and still, reflecting my terrified face. Faces appeared under the surface, mouths moving as if trying to speak. I screamed, pounding on doors, but they were locked or simply vanished when I tried to open them. Finally, I reached the engine room, or at least I thought I did. The place was enormous, far larger than the blueprints I had seen in the safety brochure suggested. Machinery groaned and screeched like it was alive, and steam hissed from vents that shouldn't exist. In the center of the room, a figure stood on the deck above the water that now covered the floor. It was a man, I thought at first, but as I approached, I saw his face had no eyes, just smooth skin stretching where eyes should have been. And then he smiled, impossibly wide, the corners of his mouth cracking like porcelain. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, and the voice echoed all around me, though it came from nowhere. The water surged, and I was suddenly submerged, sucked under the surface. Panic filled me as I kicked and thrashed, the black water closing over my head. And then I saw them. Hundreds of faces beneath the surface, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes glowing faintly. They swirled around me, pulling, grabbing, whispering my name. I woke, gasping, chest heaving, on my balcony. The sun was just rising over the horizon. Everything seemed normal, the waves calm, the ship shining in the morning light. No faces, no water in the corridors, no whispers. I convinced myself it had been a vivid, terrifying dream. But when I went to breakfast, things were off. Every passenger I saw was silent, staring straight ahead, moving mechanically. The staff smiled too widely, as if holding back laughter. And when I went to the balcony that night, I saw the water, moving unnaturally. Ripples forming shapes that looked like human figures, faces pressing against the surface, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes locked on me. I tried to leave the ship at the next port, but my luggage vanished. The docks were empty of any crew or staff. The taxi driver who should have been waiting was gone, and every time I tried to call for help, my phone rang from the ship itself. I answered once, just once. "Why did you leave?" a voice whispered, familiar and distorted. "We were waiting for you." I dropped the phone. The line went dead. I made it home eventually, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I was followed. At night, when the wind blows just right, I hear faint tapping, scratching, whispers. And sometimes, in the reflection of my bedroom window, I see the faint outline of a ship, far away on a black ocean, moving closer, waiting for me to fall asleep again. I never wanted to cruise again, but I know it doesn't matter. The ship is out there. It waits. And one day it will come for me again. I never thought a vacation could turn into something I'd never forget or survive. I'd always been the kind of person who loved cruises, the endless blue of the ocean, the hum of engines under the hull, the illusion that you could leave the world behind. This time, I booked a 7-day cruise along the Caribbean, thinking nothing could possibly go wrong. I was wrong. It started the first night. I'd just finished dinner in the main dining hall, a lavish room filled with golden chandeliers and walls of polished mahogany. The staff were unusually stiff, smiles too perfect, eyes that lingered a little too long. I chalked it up to nerves. Perhaps the ship was new, and everyone was anxious to impress. I had a balcony cabin on the 8th deck, the kind that makes you feel like the ocean is yours alone. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I heard a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind against the hull, but the taps were rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. They came from the corridor outside my door. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Empty hallway. My heart calmed a little, and I told myself I was imagining things. The wind, the ship settling. It had to be that. By the second night, the tapping became a soft scratching. I jolted awake around 2 a.m., convinced someone was outside my door. The ship was quiet, too quiet, for a vessel that carried hundreds of passengers. I strained my ears and realized I could hear muffled voices, whispers almost, but I couldn't make out the words. I opened the door. The hallway stretched empty, lit dimly by the emergency lights, and the faint smell of salt and engine oil filled the air. I went back to bed, trying to shake the unease that had begun to creep into my chest. The third night was worse. I woke to the sound of something dragging across the carpeted floor. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I froze, listening. It stopped suddenly, then started again, closer this time. My door handle rattled, but no one came in. My phone wouldn't work. No signal. I tried the cabin phone to reach the front desk. Dead. Just static. Panic began to set in. I dressed and stepped onto the balcony. The night was still, the water black and endless. No sign of other passengers on deck. But then I noticed the lifeboats. One of them, hanging idle above the deck, swayed slightly. The rope wasn't moving with the motion of the waves. It swayed, as if someone had just climbed in. I blinked, and it stopped. I shook my head, telling myself it was my imagination. The next day, I tried to shake it off. I went to the pool, mingled with other passengers, and convinced myself it had been nothing more than dreams and sea anxiety. But I couldn't ignore the way people looked at me. Not in the friendly way people normally do, but like they were observing, testing, waiting. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Around midnight, the ship's announcements crackled over the intercom. A cheerful voice welcoming us to a special midnight tour of the engine room for a lucky few. My cabin door shook. Tap, tap, tap. I bolted to the door, yanked it open, and nothing. The hallway was empty, but I noticed a faint trail of water leading down to the elevator. Hesitant, I followed it. The water was dark, almost black and sticky. My shoes sank slightly into it. It led me to the service elevator, which was odd because it was supposed to be locked. The door slid open on its own. I stepped in, my reflection distorted in the polished metal walls. The elevator dropped silently, far below the decks I had ever been allowed to go. When the doors opened, I found myself in a corridor I had never seen before. The walls were steel, pockmarked with rust, lights flickering overhead. And then I smelled it, the scent of decay, metallic and wet, sharp and unmistakable. My stomach churned. I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the shadows. At first, I thought they were crew members, but the way they moved was wrong. Jerky, unnatural, limbs twisting in ways human bodies shouldn't. One of them turned, and I saw its face. Hollow eyes, a grin too wide, stretched as if the mouth had been carved into something else entirely. It stepped toward me, gliding rather than walking. I screamed. The figure paused, then melted into the shadows like water. I ran, my feet splashing in the black water that now coated the floor. Doors appeared along the corridor, some leading to mechanical rooms, others to staircases that seemed to go on endlessly, descending into darkness. Every door I opened led to more darkness, more water, more whispering voices that called my name. I stumbled into a massive chamber, what I realized must be the engine room. The air was thick with smoke and steam, machinery groaning as if alive. And there, in the center, a group of people, passengers I recognized from dinner, from the pool, even the staff, stood perfectly still, heads tilted unnaturally, mouths open in silent screams. Black veins crawled across their skin, spreading with every heartbeat. When they saw me, they didn't move, but I felt their eyes, hollow and accusing, burrow into me. I turned to run. Behind me, the whispering grew louder, forming words. "You shouldn't be here. You don't belong." I didn't stop running until my legs burned and the water reached my waist. Doors slammed shut on their own around me, forcing me forward into corridors I didn't recognize, twisting in impossible ways, leading me deeper into the belly of the ship. Finally, I found a ladder leading up. I climbed, my hands raw, scraping against rusted metal until I burst onto the upper deck. The night was eerily calm, moonlight reflecting on the water. I ran toward the nearest lifeboat, intending to escape, only to see them, shadows on the deck, dozens of them moving silently toward me. Their eyes glowed in the dark. I jumped into the lifeboat, untied it, and let it drop into the water. Paddling with all my strength, I screamed at the ship, hoping someone, anyone, could hear me. The vessel, once a gleaming paradise, now looked grotesque, its lights flickering and dying one by one, like a creature exhaling its last breath. The water around the boat churned, and I saw them, faces pressed against the hull, grinning, mouths impossibly wide, whispering my name in unison. Morning came. I washed up on a deserted beach, sun burning my skin, waves gentle and peaceful. I called the Coast Guard, but no one believed me. They found no ship, no footprints in the sand. Just me, clutching my clothes, shaking, muttering about faces and whispers. It's been months. I haven't slept well since. At night, I see shadows at the edges of my vision, silhouettes moving against the walls of my apartment. My phone sometimes rings, and when I answer, I hear the faint creak of a ship, the drip of water, and a voice, soft, deliberate, saying, "You're not done. You never leave." I keep telling myself it was a hallucination, seasickness, stress, trauma, rational explanations. But I know better. Somewhere out there, that ship sails still, cutting through black waters, waiting for the next person to fall asleep in a cabin, the next soul to wander into the corridors where humans aren't meant to go. And I know, if it ever finds me again, I won't get away a second time. Thanks for watching. If you want the next terrifying story, hit like, comment, and subscribe.